morning, everyone. My name is Nona Kalakaua Hatayama. It's good to see you all this morning. And today we're going to be talking about helping a loved one faced with terminal illness. And as Sue and I were discussing just briefly, even if you don't have a terminal illness or you don't know anyone, this is good knowledge to have. Just for yourself. I read somewhere recently that there are 2.4 million Americans who die every year, and many of them as a result of or due to complications of terminal illness. What I found is that recently in my own life, more and more you're encountering people who are either A, diagnosed with a terminal illness themselves, or B, living and trying to be supportive for someone who's in that situation. And it became really obvious to me that from my own personal dealings, which I'll get into in a bit, that a lot of us just don't know. We're not prepared. And when you're thrown into that, it's like just a big sea of confusion. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I was married for 25 years, and my husband was diagnosed with prostate cancer in December of 2009. Well, he was diagnosed in February of 2009, and he died in December. But prior to that, we had lived with my parents. We owned a home together, and both my parents died. So my mom died in August of 2007, complications with renal failure. My dad died in May of 2009, and then my husband in December of 2009. And throughout that time period, I was the healthcare agent for all three of them. And by going through that, that's where I just learned there's so many things that many people just don't know. And I thought, looking back on it, if I had had some of the knowledge that I had, in hindsight, it would have made the process a little easier. And so in talking with, I had a girlfriend who's also presenting today, and she was asking me, Nona, is there anything that you think maybe you could share with our Wahine to help them? And so we started talking about what I've been through. And she said, I think a lot of people would really appreciate having that kind of knowledge. So what I'd like to do today is, and before I went further, I just want to preface it with, I'm a personal injury paralegal. I've been doing this for personal injury paralegal for 25 years. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a social worker. So I don't have any professional knowledge. The knowledge that I'm going to be sharing with you today is strictly from just my personal experience and just giving you some helpful tips and some advice and trying to answer any questions that you might have, okay? What I'd like to do is just touch on a couple of different topics, and I have a handout that I'd like to share with you, and then at the end, give some time for answers, questions and answers, okay? So let's see. First step, and it can be, and just for simplicity's sake, as I go through today, I'll be talking about loved one in terms of my loved one, which is my husband. So it'll be he, but of course it can be your sister, your brother, or your mom, your dad, whatever. When the diagnosis is first made, that is like a kick in the gut. Especially if it's something that's totally unexpected. Your initial reaction is maybe something like, oh, what? And shock, anger. What I've found, and having gone through it 3 times, is if you can try to just focus in on your loved one, for a minute and temper your own emotions, look to him or her and see where their mindset is at. Try to gauge and just, deep breath, because you are going to be, it's a hard thing, but ask them, are you okay? Or if they want to talk, let them talk. If they don't want to talk, just let them be. And try to just, reassure them, I'm here, what can I do to help you? Whatever you need, let me try, to give them a little reassurance, because at that point, they're feeling very much alone and scared and uncertain, and if you can do that and then get them to just put it in perspective and say, okay, one step at a time, we can do this and we can get through it. The next thing I would encourage you to do is you need to get some power, and knowledge is power. And especially if you're a person who's been diagnosed with something that you're totally unfamiliar with, have had no experience with, or just you just don't have enough knowledge of it. So the first thing to do is you want to be a sponge. Soak up all the knowledge you can find regarding the illness, its treatment, as well as its progression. And the best place to start is with your doctor, your patient's doctor. Sometimes physicians are very receptive to sharing knowledge. with, family members. And sometimes they're not. And it's a matter of, you kind of need to gauge this particular doctor that you're dealing with, gauge that doctor's mindset. If they seem open and receptive and they want to talk and share, excellent. You couldn't ask for anything more, But if they're not, and if they tend to be, and some doctors are, they tend to, knowledge is like money, so they'll hold it tight to their, in their pocketbook. Then you kind of need to just say, Doc, I don't know anything about this. I would like to help my husband to make informed decisions, and I would like to help him to feel comfortable with what's going on. Can you help me? Can you point me in the right direction where I can get information, or can you? And most times what they'll do is they'll just give you handouts. Doctors are good at giving handouts. Here, you've been diagnosed with prostate cancer. Go home and learn about it. And if that's all you get from the doctor, then at least it's something, So what I say is start with the doctor, see what kind of information you can gain from the doctor, and then your next step is go out and get more information. Use the internet. If you're not an internet person, go to the library. Whatever you can do, go and try to get as much information as you can. Keeping in mind that the internet is just a tool. It's not an authority, So the information that you get, compare it to what the doctor has told you, and compare it to the literature that he has given you. Is it consistent? Does it match up? Or is it like way out there? If it's something that's really different from everything you've read so far, then take a step back and be a little cautious with it, But I still think, even though there's information out there that could lead you astray, there's so much information that is good and helpful that you just need to be able to filter it and learn how to, judge what's... And of course, bottom line is, if you come across something that is just, oh my gosh, this could be like a miracle cure, go straight to the doctor and just ask. They won't, most times they won't harm you, hurt you, oh, that's the wrong word. They won't fault you for asking because they know that, you just want to help and you want knowledge, okay? As you research and attempt to learn about the illness that you're dealing with, you should try to gauge your loved one's state of mind on the issue, okay? What I found is that sometimes they want to know, sometimes they want to know everything they can about the situation they're faced with. That was the case with my dad. My dad, he wanted to know everything I could learn about the type of lung cancer he was dealing with. But in the case of my husband, and this went along with his personality, is he didn't want to know. He didn't want to be burdened with all of that information, And I'll tell you a little story. When Ken was first diagnosed with prostate cancer, the doctor just said, you have prostate cancer, and you need to take these pills, and you need to go for chemotherapy, and make an appointment, and I'll see you in a month. And sent us home. And I thought, well, so I said, well, how did you make the diagnosis, doctor? And he says, well, because his PSA, and PSA is his lab work, and it's a certain number, and so that's over the threshold. And I said, okay. So I said, can I see that test? And he gave me the test, and we went home. As I started doing my research, it became very apparent to me very quickly that Ken not only had prostate cancer, but he was stage 4 prostate cancer, which is the worst, the last final stage that you could have. And because of that, and this really freaked me out, was he had about 6 months to live. The doctor did not tell us that when we went, The doctor didn't say anything about the stages, which to me was critical information that we should have been given. And so then as I'm learning, I'm thinking, okay, and I realized Ken doesn't know this. And I know my husband now. I know he's not the type of man that wants to just delve right in and so we were talking, and I asked him, I said, hon, I found out a lot of information about prostate cancer, do you want to know? And the first time he says no. I said, okay, let it go. A week or two later, we're talking about something, and I asked him again, and he says, why, what did you find out? And so I told him. And the look on his face was complete shock. He says, well, why didn't the doctor tell me this? I said, I'm sorry, hon, I don't know. And I don't understand. I said, but the next time we go see the doctor, I would like to ask him that. And so we went and we asked the doctor, and he says, well, I just didn't think that I should tell you that on your very first appointment. And I said, well, doctor, I appreciate you trying to be sensitive to our needs, but our needs dictated having as much information and knowledge as we could. And especially at that point, I said, as it was, I picked this up I said, it wasn't a good thing. He said, well, I apologize. So, for me, it was a matter of gauging Ken's mindset and finding, okay, and then if they want the information, give them the information. What that ended up doing, because Ken was very distrustful of the doctors after that point, is he told the doctor, from here on in, you do not talk to me about my medical condition. You will speak to my wife. And part of it had to do with the fact of my legal background and the fact that I had some medical knowledge, having been in the field and all. And the doctors that he was dealing with got angry at sometimes, because they would come in, he's in the hospital, he was hospitalized multiple times, and they would come in and they would want to just say, okay, this is what we're dealing with, I need to talk to you, and then I need to move on to my next patient. And he would kind of say, no, you need to wait until my wife gets here. My wife's on her way from Cairo, she'll be here in just a minute. But Mr. Hachiyama, I'm very busy. And the kid's like, no, I do not want to speak to you. No. And my husband is pure Japanese, samurai warrior, just, no, not going to talk to you. So when I got there, at one point, the doctor says, Ms. Hachiyama, I shouldn't have to wait for you. And I said, excuse me, doctor. Yes, you should. Your patient has asked you to wait for me. I'm his healthcare agent. He does not feel capable of speaking with you right now. This is what you must do. And he looked at me and said, okay, Ms. Hachiyama, thank you. But, so just, enough on that one. All right, next thing I want to talk about, so as you're going through this process, one of the things you really want to start focusing on is you want to open up dialogues, okay? Open up the dialogue. As a support system for your loved one, you are a facilitator. I look at it as your job is to make things happen. So if making things happen means, getting information, then you go out and you do what you need to do to get information. If making things happen means your loved one needs to, say he has an issue with a family member and he's feeling bad about it, he wants to, try to go talk to the family member. And try to see if they want to talk story. You want to open up the dialogue with them too, because as we all know, in Hawaii, family is our whole life. So anytime anybody in our family is diagnosed, everybody's like, oh my goodness, how can I help? What can I do? And they want to know, and it's very tiring for the loved one to have to always answer the questions, because they're always the same questions, And so if you, as a support system, can be there and you can help open up that dialogue, you can take some of the burden off of your loved one. And also, you can just calm things down, because the last thing that your loved one, aloha, good morning.
Is this preparing?
Yes, come on in. Aloha, good morning. So if you can take some of that burden off, that is really, I know, a blessing, something that they very much appreciate. The other thing that's important to try to do is to encourage the opening up of dialogue between your loved one and his or her medical provider, the doctor. You'd be surprised, you'd think that, oh, of course they're gonna talk to the doctor. That's the doctor. Not really, And I found this with my husband. I found this with my father. They don't want to talk to the doctor because to them the doctor's bad news. The doctor is the one that told them they were going to die in the first place. So they would prefer not to. But really, if they can get to the point where they can open up that dialogue, I think the information, the knowledge that it gives is a better thing. And as long as you're there to kind of help to temper things, it could be helpful. Yes?
Who is they that you talk about?
I'm sorry.
Who is they? The family?
Yeah, well, we're talking about, when I say they, it can mean like either your loved one, like if you're helping, say if it's your husband or your sister or your brother who's been diagnosed and you're the one that's the support system, or then they could have also been the doctor, I'm sorry, it was a wrong use of a pronoun, but we're talking about a situation where you're the support system for your person, and it could be any family member, and trying to open up the dialogue between that person and say family members or their doctor, and of course yourself too. That's the first and most important, because you want to be able to know what is in their heart, what is on their mind, and how can you best help them. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? So the next thing is, and this one is the most important part of the whole process, that I call it taking charge of the paperwork. Okay? How many of you have heard of the term advanced healthcare directives? Okay. Basically, advanced healthcare directives are what used to be called the living will. And then they changed it to be a more politically correct term. So what it means, there are two parts to an advanced healthcare directive. Okay? The first part is what they call a durable power of attorney for healthcare. And the second part are specific instructions regarding medical care and end-of-life issues, okay? I'd like to pass out, I have some handouts for you. No problem. We went through just about two or three, and we can do a little wrap-up before, but nothing real critical. It was mostly just, in general, kind of stuff, talking about, you know, when you have a loved one or yourself and you're faced with a terminal illness, you know, as a support system for a loved one, we talked about just being there and trying to open up the dialogue and trying to gauge where your loved one's mindset is at to see how you can help them. Okay. So what I've given you is a form that I downloaded from the UH Elder Law program, and it's what they call their short form of Advanced Healthcare Directive. Okay. When advanced healthcare therapists, people think, oh my God, that's a living will. I got to hire an attorney. Not necessarily. Okay. There are many places on the internet where they have forms similar to these. I use this one because it's a real simple, easy form to understand, and it's here in Hawaii, so you know it's current with Hawaii's laws. And what you can do is you don't even have, a healthcare directive doesn't even have to be typed up. Nowadays, if you go to a hospital and it wasn't an expected hospitalization, and they ask if you have one and you don't, they have a form they can give you. And you can, you and your person can fill it out and get it done there. Okay, so, and for most people, the simple form is fine and it's sufficient. If they also have a long form, which is about, maybe twice the size of it, and that's also online and available for you to download if you want to. But for most of us, the simple form will work. Okay, so let's talk about the durable power of attorney. All right, with a durable power of attorney, a loved one or a patient, it designates another individual to be his power of attorney and carry out healthcare decisions in case he is unable to do so, okay, or in case he doesn't want to do so, which was the case of my husband, you know. And then that way, what that does is that takes the burden off of them. You know, it's a tremendous relief too. And so once you do that, and you can have your power of attorney take authority immediately upon the person signing, or at a designated time in the future. You know, it can say when my doctor says that my condition is. Good morning. You're here for helping a loved one prepare or helping a loved one deal with it. Aloha. Good morning. Aloha.
Sorry.
Welcome. Give you some food. We're talking about Advanced Healthcare Directive, and here's a form that I downloaded from the internet.
Hi.
So, as I was saying, the Advanced Healthcare Directive is comprised of two parts. The power of attorney is where the patient or the loved one appoints an individual to act as his agent to make healthcare decisions in case he's unable to or does not want to, all right? And the authority can take effect immediately or at a designated time in the future. The second part of the Advanced Directive includes specific instructions regarding forms of medical treatment, what he desires at the end of life, and those kinds of things. So why don't we take a look at the form, and I'd like to go through it just so that when you go home, you'll know, okay, yeah, we talked about this, and you know, it'll be familiar to you, okay? First of all, if you look at on the back, there's a checklist. And this is good because this kind of just tells you what you need to do as you're doing this, okay? So the first thing you want to talk with family members and friends and ask someone you trust. And then you want to complete the form and just go down the list. Okay, well, we'll come back to the list in a bit, but over here, on the information about the advanced healthcare directors. It tells you just pretty much what we've talked about here, about how you need to appoint someone and what that person has to be able to do and what the extent of it is, okay? Now let's go to page, I think it's 4th page in, the one that says Advanced Healthcare Directive here at the top. And then all your person has to do is you can just go through it, handwrite and fill it in. So you fill in the name, you want to fill in the name of the individual who's going to be the agent, the address, the relationship, those kinds of things. And then you see in the middle where it says when my agent's authority becomes effective. If they check the box, then that means it would be immediately. And if they don't check the box, and even if they check the box, it says they always retain the right to make their own decisions along the way, so they can always take it back. Okay?
That's almost like a revocable living.
I'm sorry.
That's almost like a revocable living.
Yes, yes. Always, and that's the good thing, because then that gives your person, the ability to decide how much or how little, of that burden they want to carry.
I do have a question, though.
Surely.
I note that it says asking for designation of an agent.
Yes.
In my particular case, I did not want the burden of any of my children having to decide.
Okay.
So,
good point.
Is that where the forms have changed? Because the one I signed years ago said, I have made this decision, there will be no thus and such, what have you.
Okay.
So that burden is taken away from my children.
Did you appoint a non-family member to be your agent?
No, I didn't appoint anybody.
You didn't appoint anybody, so you didn't want to have a healthcare agent.
No.
Family to be agent.
You didn't want a family to be
I
agent.
didn't want anybody to be. I was responsible for me now that I'm still healthy and I can make the decisions. I don't want that burden laid on my children.
I understand.
So my question is this the new form that you need to designate?
Yes.
Oh.
And I can understand what you're saying, and I respect that, I really do. But what I was thinking is, if you didn't want a family member to be a person, how would you feel with a non-family member?
I didn't want that burden on anybody.
You didn't want that burden on anybody.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just
I
wondering.
can understand.
Do they have forms like that still? So
You
far,
know,
that's
to be
still
honest
in my
with you,
medical records.
To be honest with you, and you missed this part when you came in, I explained, so forgive me for being repetitive, but I'll give them so they know. How I know about this stuff is both my parents and my husband have died like within 5 years, and I was their healthcare agent for all 3 of them, and that's been from since about 2007 through 2009 when my husband died, and all of them. Everybody had to have, each of them had to have a healthcare agent, the doctors were firm on that. And really, me personally, I think that it's a very necessary thing. If I were you and I didn't want to have a family member or anybody burdened with it, somebody needs to, in case of you being unable to speak or some decision needs to be made, somebody needs to stand up for you. You know what I mean? That's just my personal feeling.
Is it necessary to have one person, or can you have two? Like I have 2 daughters and...
You can have 2.
Yeah?
Yeah, you can have 2. And you can have a situation where you can have, like, if one cannot, then the other,
Yeah.
So, just in case one is unavailable or for whatever reason does not want to have that burden, then the other one would take it back. Okay? All right. So let's go on. Let's go to part 2 at the bottom of that page, which is end of life decisions. Okay? This is where your person is going to want to put instructions about how they want things to be handled when they get to that end of life stage. Okay? And so the first thing says, if I'm close to death and life support would only postpone the moment of my death, or if I'm in an unconscious state, such as an irreversible coma or a persistent vegetative state, and it's unlikely I will become conscious again, or if I have brain damage or brain disease, then they would check the box. And in this box, they have to decide whether or not they want their life to be prolonged, or they don't want it to be prolonged, or they want their healthcare agent to make that decision.
This answered my question.
Yeah.
She did.
Then part B talks about artificial nutrition and hydration. Sometimes when people get to that end of life stage, artificial nutrition and hydration, it's not an absolute necessity, but it's a choice. And some people choose not to have it, and some people choose to have it. So it really is up to, up to your person's preference. Okay? Part C, relief from pain. There are some people, there are myths out there that if you're diagnosed with a terminal illness and you've been told, okay, your time is near, you're going to die, and your person has said they do not want to prolong life, that means they don't want pain medication. That's not true. At that stage of a person's illness, pain medication is a wonderful thing, because it gives them peace, it gives it comfort. You know what I mean? So in this case, this is really important because at least they just because they're on the rail, at least they'll be comfortable. You want them to be comfortable. You don't want them to be suffering.
I'm a little concerned about the last 5 words, even if it hastens my death.
Yes.
How does pain medication hasten one's death?
Because sometimes, for example, and I'll go back to in my husband's case with prostate cancer, in the last month, the only thing that helped to lessen his pain was morphine.
I see.
Very strong, very, very strong. And if I could share a little story with you, one of the last things Ken wanted to do was he wanted to go to Vegas. He was a gambler. And so I told him, okay, I'll take you to Vegas. And I arranged for a trip, and we're going to travel in November. Well, after I made the reservations, he became immobile. He could not walk. I hired somebody to go with us so I could transport him on the plane, take him to Vegas. Okay, and we went to Vegas. But the problem was, by that point, he had developed a really bad bed sore. And all the doctors and nurses were telling us, he should not go, he should not go. It's going to be really bad. It's going to be really bad. And so I asked him, what do you want to do? And he says, I want to go. And so I asked the nurse, the hospice and the nurse, I said, Ken, is there anything you can do? Can you give me any? And she says, we can give you morphine, and we can teach you how to administer it. And if he needs it, you just need to keep him comfortable, And so I said, okay, so I told him, you need to, and we went through the numbers, when your pain gets to this level, you need to tell me because I need to know that you're going to get to this level and I want to give you the medicine now. Long story short, we went to Vegas. He had a great time. He did all the things he wanted to do, okay? And he did all the things he wanted to do, and on the morning we were coming home, and it was like November 30th because we went over Thanksgiving, and I don't know why, but I looked at him and I said, babe, do you think you're still going to be here for Christmas? And he looked at me, and he said, I'm sure going to try. And we went home, and 3 days later, he died.
Oh.
Yeah. And yet, and when I look back now, I realized he knew how close his time was. I was blinded, in denial, whatever, but he knew. And I was so glad that I had that opportunity, and luckily we were able to manage his pain levels with the morphine satisfactorily and no untoward results, so I'm a firm believer. In that situation, pain medication is a wonderful thing. Okay?
I did of that.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so then the last thing is, and the last one I think is just kind of like a catch-all. Now, after you get this done, so that's the form. You can do it you don't have to have a notary. If you have 2 witnesses, to notarize, to witness the document, then it's sufficient. Two things you should know, I forgot to mention, is your witnesses should not be family members or related to you. That's important, okay? Just to keep everything above board, no questions about unfair influence, those kinds of things, okay? And the other thing is the healthcare agent that you appoint, in case you don't have a family member, should not be an employee or a doctor or a nurse of your doctor, that kind of thing. Okay, so that's important to know too. And then, of course, if you want to have a notary, on the back is the notary form. If you have a notary that, I'm lucky because being in the legal field, I know a lot of notaries, so I never had a problem getting a notary to come to my home. It was just always easier that way, Okay, do we have any questions about the form? Anything? Okay. And if any of you, if you want, I have a whole bunch. I have extras. You're welcome. I give you so much you guys can take home with you, But do also please go on the website, UH Elder Law, and look it up in case you want to do the long form or if you have questions. They have a lot of information there that's really helpful. And most of the stuff is what we're talking about here today. Okay? All right, let's see now.
I have one off question.
I'm sorry.
I have one question and maybe a little off.
Okay.
The notary, is that to be on a separate sheet? Because I noticed these are back-to-back.
Yes, yes, and you know what? Good point, thank you. I put them back to back to, save the trees. But when you print up the form, print them out single page.
Single page.
And the notary should be on a separate page, yes. Good morning, Aloha.
I had a question. Maybe you said it earlier ago.
Okay.
Once you fill this out, then what do you?
Oh, good point,
have to do
thank you.
it?
I'm getting sidetracked here. Okay, yes. So once you fill it out and your form is complete, then you want to make a bunch of copies, okay? And keep your original in a safe place. And the copies you want to give out, okay? You want to make sure that your doctors have a copy of it. You want to give to, of course, you should have a copy of it. And if there's anybody else who's like your backup, you know, or like an alternate healthcare agent, make sure they have a copy as well. You had a question? Okay.
Can I get a copy?
Sure. And if you want, I can catch you up after. So then make the copies. Now, the other thing I wanted to just kind of give you a little tip. After you make the copies, for me, I always kept one in my purse. Anytime I went to the doctor with my husband or my mom or my dad, I always had one in my purse. And I'll tell you why. You go to the doctor, say there's a situation going on, and they take my husband into the operating room because, you know, something, and I'm like, well, what the heck? You know, I want to talk to the man, the doctor's busy. Well, I want to know what's going on. We can't talk to you, ma'am. You're not authorized. I said, oh, yes, I am. Sorry. Here's my form. Now talk to me, damn it. And you'd be surprised how the attitude changes immediately. Immediately. Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Hachiyama. What can we do for you? You know? And so it's just, and the other thing is, whenever you go in, if you have that and they know you have that, things just go smoother. You know?
So do you have the original?
You keep the original at home in a safe place, but when you go, you give copies. And if anybody asks you, well, how do I know this is authentic? Then you go home and you get your original. But in most places, they will just accept the copy. The copy is fine. Okay? Yeah. Any more questions on this one? Okay. And the other thing is, some people say, well, you should give it to family members too. And that really is up to the discretion of your loved one. You know, if your loved one wants family members to have, then they'll tell you, and then you can do it. But if they don't, and you should ask them, you know, because a lot of family members will be coming, well, what's going on, Grandma? Is she okay with? You know, find out from your loved one, what is the extent of information they want shared? Because you want to respect their privacy, you know? And if they say, well, you know, you can tell them ABC, but don't tell them DEF, then of course you tell them ABC and not DEF. If they say, I don't want them to know anything, then you just try to explain lovingly to the family members that, you know, right now, Ken prefers that, you know, we just keep things kind of, you know, hush-hush. You know, he don't want to share information. And most times, the family members will be very happy to get any kind of information that they can. You know, they want to be help. They want to help. So, okay. Let's see. How are we doing on time? Okay, good. All right. So, any more questions on the form? All right. So the next thing we're going to move on to is, I call it, and when the time is right, you want to make the hospice call. Does anybody know what hospice is? Yeah. In case anybody doesn't, hospice is a type of care. It's a philosophy of care that focuses on providing comfort and support, not only to the patient, but also to their families. And hospice normally comes into play when curative treatments are no longer working. In other words, despite all of the different therapies and treatments that a doctor, you know, can prescribe or have your patient do, it doesn't seem to be stopping the disease or slowing it down. And at that point, you know, the doctor will say, okay, you know, perhaps hospice. What hospice care does is when the patient is put under hospice care, it's kind of an acceptance of the fact that their time is near. And the focus becomes not on necessarily finding a cure, but on making them comfortable and giving them peace of mind, you know. In my situation, I had this bias prior to dealing with my parents' death and my husband's. I had this bias that once a person goes into hospice, and that's it, you're giving up, you're throwing in the towel. And so when it came time with Ken, we were in the hospital for a hospitalization, and his doctor had arranged for a hospice doctor to come in to see us. And I happened to come in, and Ken said, oh, honey, this is Dr. Seitz, and she's the hospice doctor. And I said, excuse me? We didn't call it hospice, you know? And I said, can I speak with you outside? So I took her outside, and I said, I'm sorry, Doc. Thank you. I appreciate your time, but no, we're not doing hospice. She said, are you sure, Ms. Tatiyama? Because we can help. And I said, oh, no. We are not giving up. We are fighting the big fight. But that wasn't what Ken wanted. That was what Nona wanted, So when I went back in, and she was very gracious, and I sat down, and I talked to him. I said, were you upset because they sent the hospice doctor in? They're saying basically, okay, we're just going to let you die. And he said, no, Nona. No. He said, I want the hospice doctor. And I looked at him, I said, no, we're not giving up. We're not, And he said, no. He said, I want the hospice doctor because the doctor will help you and it will help us. He said, I know I'm going to die. Baby, he says, I know I'm going to die. But in this time that we have left, he goes, I want them to help you so that you're not, he goes, because I watch you, he says, and you need help. He goes, and I learned stuff when you weren't here. He says, I learned at the hospital, they provide all kinds of care. So when he told me that, I took a step back, and no, come on, and called the doctor. She came in, and it was the best decision that we could have ever made. I was so glad that we did it, because it lifted a lot of the burden off of me. They provide so many different forms of help, One of the most wonderful things they did was they sent, and during the time, the last month when Ken was immobile and couldn't do anything, they sent a guy to come in, and he would come in every other day to bathe my husband, And sure, I could do it, and I did do it, but it's different, For me, I did it, and I did it because I loved him, but it was hard to see my husband in that kind of a situation. And having a gentleman come in, and then I would listen, and he and Ken would talk about fishing, and so it was a good outlet for Ken, and good socialization. So I thought, thank you, Lord, and it was a good thing. The other thing about it was hospice also provides supportive care for family members, counseling, helping you talk about the feelings you're having, and this is both during the time that your person is alive and afterwards too. After that person has passed, and hospice has supportive care, and I am just so thankful that we had that the time that we did, and highly recommend for anybody early on look at hospice and learn, because even if you look at it early and it's not time for your person, that information.
Paid for hospice services?
Hospice services are covered by Medicare, or if your person is not on Medicare yet, and say that there are, but you don't have to pay, and not for the medication.
So Medicare insurance pays for it.
Yes, and especially if they've been diagnosed with a terminal illness, automatically Medicare for hospice.
It's also covered under your own medical insurance.
Yes.
And if you can't pay, they'll write you.
Yeah, they're very, very compassionate and just so wonderful. Okay, let's see now. All right. And the other thing about hospice that I was really impressed with was, okay, so, and they come into your home. Yes, prior to getting involved with hospice, I'd only heard about the kind where they got, you put them in the hospital, the hospice hospital, and, but no, they come to your home, and they have different, like we had a social worker coming in, and we had the guy coming in to bathe Ken, we had the nurse that would come in and check on him, and then we had another nurse that would come in just for the bed sore, so it's just a whole range of variety of care, and so helpful, So, any more questions on that one? Almost to my end. Most importantly, be a mouthpiece for your person. Sometimes, for whatever reason, your loved one has a message. He needs to express him or herself, and just can't get it out. And if you've been developing a dialogue, then they'll tell you, and they'll say, well, can you talk to it? And so then your job becomes, again, the facilitator. You're talking to Uncle Joe and trying to make right the rift, or and all you can do is try, and your loved one will be at the point where if he's asked you to talk to Uncle Joe because they had a little hoo-hoo, and he wants to make it right, and you try, but Uncle Joe's resistant. The fact that you tried, that's all they want. They just want that opportunity, and it's very liberating for them to have a mouthpiece, and let the mouthpiece do the work. And they don't. And another example of that is what I was telling you the story earlier with my husband, where he didn't want to talk to the doctor. He didn't want to have to deal with that burden. and so he just said, I want my wife to decide, and I want her to make the decisions because she knows what I want, and I don't want to deal with it. So while it was frustrating for the doctors, that was too bad because he was the patient and that was his wishes, you know. Okay. My last point would be just be there. Just be a presence. You know, you don't have to always, and just being there, whether you talk or you don't talk, it doesn't matter. Just so that they know that you're there, and they know that no matter what, and this is something that I was always with my parents and with Ken, whatever we need to do, Mom, you know, whatever you need, I'm here. If there's something you want, you need to tell me, and I'll go get it for you, you know, or I'll go find it somehow. But just to know that they've got that unwavering support and that person that's there, and it's open. Yeah, it's very much relieved and takes a burden off. Okay.
There's also, for those who don't have that support system and are not doing the hospice thing, anyone don't have the support system, they have, like Kuhinapapa Hospital or some other hospitals where you as a caregiver, you need to have a break.
Respite care.
You need your respite care.
Yes.
So, to refresh yourself.
Yes.
And so, some of the hospitals will take your patient, your loved one, overnight
Yes.
or a couple of days if necessary to give you that relief.
That respite.
Yeah.
And yes, I've seen, good point, thank you. And that is so helpful because sometimes, you know, we can only do what we can do, we're all human. And so after running at high levels for so long, you know, everybody gets burnt out. Everybody needs a break and you need to refresh yourself so that you can come back and keep doing what you're doing, you know. So as I get ready to wrap up my part of the talk, the thing I have is, you know, so why would you want to do it? Why do this? It's a difficult job, very difficult. It's very emotional, you know, very tiring, especially here in Hawaii. We all got to work, you know, in order to put food on the table. So in addition to working full time, you know, you're also putting a lot of extra time, you know, talking to doctors, going and doing what needs to be done. You know, a lot of people might say, oh, I just don't want that burden. I can't handle that. You know, I'm sorry, I just can't do it. For me, it was the hardest thing I've ever done in all three cases, but it was also the most meaningful and significant thing that I could have done for each of my people, for my mom, my dad, and my husband. I would never want to go through it again, but if I had to go through it again, I would not waver. I would walk through that fire one more time. You know, at the end, after each death, it was a relief. You know, the sad part about it is when Ken died, my strongest feeling was of an overwhelming relief. Relief because he was no longer suffering. Relief because I was no longer fighting that big fight, carrying that burden. You know, and not that I didn't want to carry the burden. You know, it was a burden that I chose and I would willingly choose again, but it was just a relief. You know, and also then there's no regrets. Sadly, having gone through what I've gone through, I've seen way too many family members of my own family, a lot of regrets. Oh, I should have called up Auntie. Oh, I should have been there for Ken. You know, yeah, that would have been nice, but you know, too late now. Too late now. You know, my message to when I talk with my family members or anybody is, don't wait. Don't let it be too late. Take care of it now. You know. One last story before we open up for questions and answers. My uncle, who is my mom's youngest brother, died 2 weeks ago. And he'd been dealing with a brain tumor that had gotten progressively worse. And he was put in the hospital. He was in a irreversible coma. But before he went into that coma, my auntie called us and she told us. So we got to get to the hospital before he lost consciousness. And got to see him and hug him and talk to him. And I was so thankful that I had that opportunity. I was not involved in his care, thank you, as I had been with my own husband and my parents. But knowing, you know, what he's going, I'm just so glad I had that opportunity because then afterwards there were no regrets. You know, after Uncle died and I lived with my brother, and all along through the whole process, I think Uncle's not doing good. We got to go. You know, yeah. I going. Uncle died. Next day, Brother's like, oh my God, my uncle died. I said, yes, brother. I said, remember I told you last week, Uncle, we need to go. Oh, I meant to go. I said, Damien, we went through this with Mom and Dad, okay? You know this. I said, I'm sorry you're having regrets, brother. But next time, listen to your heart and your mind, okay? So that ends my formal part of the talk. Let's open it up for any questions. Anything you guys want to talk about? Anybody?
So if there's, at the time of death, who do you make contact with?
Okay.
The coroner?
Well, and it depends, all right. Let's say, for example, if your person dies at home, and if they've been under hospice care, then it's easy. All you do is you call your hospice nurse, and she will come in, and she will make all the arrangements. She'll call all the appropriate, and do what needs to be done. If you're not under hospice care, and they die at home, then you'll have to call HPD, because what they'll have to do is they'll just have to come and make sure that, it's a death related to illness, not something else, and then they'll tell you, as long as they do that, most times they'll say, okay, then you can call and arrange to have the mortuary come and pick up, your husband's body and take it, If there's some kind of a situation where they think, okay, it needs to go further, then they would make the arrangements to have the body transported. Okay. Did I answer?
I can't think of the name. What is the name when they come after the morgue?
The morgue?
No,
the mortuary?
Coroner.
Oh, coroner. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'm a personal injury paralegal. I've been doing that for 25 years. So I'm not an attorney, but I've had a lot of experience in dealing with the kind of issue we're talking about today, which is helping a loved one faced with a terminal illness. Okay. I read recently that there are 2.4 million Americans each year who die, and many of them because of or after a result of being diagnosed with a terminal illness. And this means that more and more of us, especially us Wahine, are finding ourselves living with the situation where either we're the ones that have been diagnosed with a terminal illness, but more often than not, we're living or supporting someone who has been diagnosed with a terminal illness. And if you've never faced that before, either as a patient or as a support person, it's really scary, and hard, very difficult. So, as I mentioned, I've been a paralegal for, coming in, aloha, good morning. Have a seat, we're just getting started.
Thank you.
Sure. So, I was married for 25 years to a wonderful man. And in December '09, he passed away from prostate cancer. But prior to that, during our marriage, we lived with my parents who were in their 60s, and both of them had health issues. And the reason why we bought a home with my parents is I asked them if we could do this was because I knew that they were getting on, and I was worried that if something happened to Mom or to Dad, who would take care of the other one. So Ken agreed, so we bought a home, and we were doing very well. And then all of a sudden, things started not to go so well. Long story short, in August '07, my mom passed away from complications due to renal failure. Then my dad passed away in May of '09, and my husband passed away in December of '09. So in that short period of time, and I was the healthcare agent for all three of them, that was where I got my experience in what we're talking about today. And although I'm not an attorney, just having done that so many times and having gone through that, when my girlfriend and I were talking about this conference, she said, Nona, so many people, they would benefit from the information that you have and the knowledge and the experience, she says, because they don't know. And she said, especially about living wills and stuff. Many people think that with a living will, you have to hire an attorney and you go spend money, but it's not necessary. So that's one of the things we'll talk about today. It's the most important part, is how you can get your living will done, and you can do it for free. I have some forms that you're welcome to take, or there's other places on the internet you can download if you don't like my form. But the main thing is the knowledge I want you to take away with you today is you can do it and you don't have to spend a lot of money. And it's important that you do it. Okay? So let's get started. What we're going to do is I'm going to talk on some of these topics today, and then at the end we'll open it up for a question and answer. But of course, as we go along, if a question pops up, just let me know, and we'll just handle it right then and there. Okay? Okay. So, let's start with when the diagnosis is made. That's the critical start You know, it's usually the shocking start. A lot of times you or your loved one are not expecting it. And so the initial feeling, the initial reaction is like kick in the gut, you know, and I know for me as women and many other women, the initial reaction is you're going to cry, you're going to be outraged, you're going to be angry. I like to encourage you, and I found this work, by the time I got to Ken, who was number 3, it worked really well with him because I had experience with it, to just try to take it in and be quiet a moment and look to the person that you're with and follow their direction. I'll give you an example. With my father was asking a lot of questions and wanting to know everything. With my husband, he said absolutely nothing. Put his head down, just like this. But that's his personality. He was just very, you know. And so look to them, and the best thing you can do is just let them know, I'm here for you, honey. What can I do? How can I help you? What's your feeling? You want to talk? Let's talk. If you don't want to talk, no problem. Let's not talk. Let's just be. You know, I found that by letting them know that you're there, your support, whatever they need, it's very comforting and very reassuring. And what you should know is that even if they might not say right then, oh yeah, I want to talk, there'll come a time as you go through your process where then they'll start to talk and they'll start to open up. And then, you know, but you might just have to be a little patient and give them that opportunity to come to that place, okay? So you've got the diagnosis is made, you're accepting it, you're trying to, you know, getting ready to live with it. The next step, let's get some power, okay? Knowledge is power. So get some power so that you can better deal with your situation. And that's by getting knowledge about the illness or whatever it is you're dealing with. The first best place to start is with your doctor. When the doctor tells you, okay, this is what you're dealing with, you know, ask questions. If you don't know what it is, ask, what is that, doctor? And the doctor has to explain it to you in regular people language that we as lay people can understand. And if they don't, you ask them again, okay? No shame. It is their job to make sure that you understand what you're faced with and that all of your questions are answered. And if you ask them again and you still don't understand, you ask them a third time. And by that point, if they're not explaining it to you in a way you understand it, you need to just, doctor, I'm really sorry. I just don't get it. Is there anybody else I could talk to that maybe could help enlighten me, you know? And then at that point, you know, they'll say, okay, then they'll try it a different way. So once you have the information from the doctor, and a lot of times what they'll do is they'll talk to you a little bit and here, go home and read about it, and they'll give you handouts. And handouts are good. Handouts can be a really good thing. They can give you information, but they're just a start, you know. So my thing is start with the doctor, get whatever information from him or her that you can get, and then go out and take it further. Get on the internet if you're internet savvy, you know, and start researching and take it from there. Keeping in mind that the internet is just a tool. It's not the final authority on everything, okay? And also keeping in mind that there are some bogus stuff out there on the internet. So whatever you gain, whatever you find, okay, whatever information, if it's consistent with what the doctor has told you, good. If it's really far out there, way different, go back to the doctor and ask the doctor about it. You know, the doctor will tell you, oh, that's totally wrong because of whatever. You know, so take it with a grain of salt and use it. You know, make sure that you're making wise decisions. Don't just say, oh, okay, here's this miracle cure for cancer. Go out and I'm going to, you know, do. No, use the information and just test it. Make sure that it's accurate. Okay. As you're doing this and as you're learning, you're going to find that you just gain so much knowledge very, very quickly, especially if you're on the internet. And you're gaining this knowledge. You learn a lot about your situation. What you need to do is you need to kind of look to your level, like I would look to Ken, and engage where their mindset is at as far as this knowledge picture, okay? And I'll tell you why. Like I said with my dad wanted to know everything, just thousands of questions and everything. And Ken wasn't that. When we got the diagnosis, the doctor just said, okay, Mr. Hatayama, you have you have prostate cancer, and you need to take these pills, and you need to call the chemotherapy clinic and schedule chemotherapy starting next week, and call me in a month and we'll follow up. And that was it. Okay, so I went home and I took the thing and I was reading up on it, and I asked the doctor, well, how do you know he has prostate cancer? And the doctor says, well, his PSA count, which is something that they lab work and their blood work, it was at so and so number, you know, and the number for cancer was way below that. So that's how I know he has prostate cancer. So I said, okay. So when I went home and I was researching and what I learned was that my husband not only had prostate cancer, he had stage 4 prostate cancer. And at that point, it's terminal, 6-month prognosis. But the doctor didn't tell us that. And I was blown away. I thought, my God, shouldn't he have told us that? You know, especially if he's starting him on chemotherapy, because my reading was telling me at that point, as a stage 4, chemotherapy's not going to do anything other than make him sick and suffer. And so, even more so, I thought we should have been given that information to make an informed decision as to whether he even wanted chemotherapy. Because what had happened was, in between me getting that knowledge, Ken had already had 1 chemotherapy session and was deathly ill. And so then I thought, okay, and I kind of felt him out, and because I know how Ken is. There are things where if he doesn't like a situation, he doesn't want to deal with it. He would rather put his head in the sand. So I'm talking to him, and I'm kind of giving that idea, like, honey, I learned a lot today about. Do you have any interest? He looked at me and he said, no. I said, okay, no problem. Let it go for a couple of weeks. And it was hard because this is like 2 weeks, and I just wanted to. Do you know? But no. A couple of weeks later, he brought it up, and he said, well, what was it you learned? And so I slowly told him, and he was shocked. He was shocked because at that point, he got the message that I got 2 weeks earlier, which was, honey, you're dying and you have 6-month prognosis, pretty much. And he got angry because he said, the doctor should have told us. The doctor should. I said, yes, he should have, but woulda, shoulda, coulda. We're not going to go there. For now, we go forward. So because of that, the point of that whole story was gauge their mindset. If they're ready to hear, talk. If they're not ready to hear, step back. Give it some time. And when they're ready to hear, then go ahead and have the talk. So when we went to the doctor the next time, I asked the doctor point blank, is my husband stage 4? And he looked at me and said, well, yes, he is. I said, well, then why didn't you tell us that during the last appointment? Oh, well, I didn't think that you needed right then and there. I said, no, excuse me, doctor. I thank you for your sensitivity. I said, but from here on out, I expect you to be fully upfront with us. And that's the other thing. When you're talking to Dr. K, you need to remember that you're an advocate for your person. Stand firm. With respect always. Talk always with respect, but stand firm. Doctors have to educate a patient and the family, and they have to do that so that you understand. So yes, we should have been given that information. No, we weren't, but it's okay. Don't make the mistake again in the future. And once we did that with that doctor, it didn't happen again. So any questions on that one? Okay. My next point is got to open up the dialogue. Okay? And there's all kinds of dialogues that got to be opened up. Dialogue between, first and foremost, between you and your loved one. Again, getting them to the place where they're ready to talk and they want to talk. Because there's so much that you can do to help them through this time, but you can't do it unless they open up to you and they talk to you about it and let their needs be known. So start talking to them and opening up that dialogue, okay? You want to encourage the dialogue to be opened up also between them and other family members. Because once a diagnosis is made, the other family members are going to have a lot of questions. They're all concerned. They all want to help. They all want to be a part of the process. And sometimes, if the loved one doesn't want to speak to them, then meanwhile the family members are, and it's just more pressure for the loved one. So talk with him and ask him, do you want, if people ask, if family members ask, what do you want me to tell them? How much do you want me to tell them? Because again, we're respectful of the privacy of our person, and we don't want to give out too much information. And if we can, the information that we pass on, if we can alleviate some of the burden on the loved one, then better yet, so that they don't have to keep answering the same questions. Every single person that will come and see your loved one will, so how you, what's the doctor saying? And it gets real tiring for them. So find out what they want you and how much they want you to do. And, then that'll help you. The other thing is open up the dialogue, or encourage the opening of the dialogue between your loved one and the medical providers. In my husband's case, after that thing with the doctor, he was so pissed off with the doctor, he wouldn't talk to him, didn't want to talk to him. What ended up happening as a result of that whole thing where the doctor didn't give us the information when he felt that we should have been given the information, is he told the doctor, from here on in, you will talk with my wife about my medical condition. I do not want to speak with you. If you have something to tell me, you need to talk to my wife. And his reasons were twofold. One was he was mad, he was Noah. The second reason was because he really didn't understand it, and he knew that I understood it. Being a medical paralegal for 25 years, I had a lot of background. I felt comfortable talking with medical providers and stuff. I felt comfortable in reading medical records. So he knew that whatever the doctor told me, I could tell it to him in a way he would understand. Aloha. And I would ask the right questions for him, you know. And at first the doctors, especially the hospital doctors, they weren't happy. They didn't like that because they're busy. They got things to do. They want to come in, they want to shoot out their thing to you, and then they want to get on. And he would say, no, you need to wait. My wife's coming from Cairo. She'll be here in a minute. Just wait. And they'd get angry. Well, we're very busy. He said, no, you need to wait. You know. And it took the burden off of him. And so I was happy to do it. But sometimes doctors aren't happy, but I don't care. All I cared about was taking care of who I need to take care of. Let me get that. No, let me get that. Sure. Okay? Let's see now. Okay. So now the next thing, and this is the critical part. Next section I call taking charge of the paperwork. Let me pass out these handouts. Yeah. So, how many of you have heard of the term advanced healthcare directives? Yeah? Most people know them as it's called living will also, you know. They changed the name to advanced healthcare directive. It's a more accurate term. An advanced healthcare directive is comprised of two parts. The first part is the living will part. And a living will basically is a document that gives instructions, come on in, gives instructions on how to deal with medical treatment and other issues when end of life time comes near. Good morning. Here, let me give you a handout. Here you go. So that's the living will part of it, okay? And we're going to go through this form in a minute, so I'll give more detail. The second part of Advanced Healthcare Directive is what's called a Durable Healthcare Power of Attorney. And in this document, basically it's a power of attorney that the patient appoints what he calls an agent, or, you know, and usually it's a loved one, it's like whoever his or her support is. And this agent is going to be responsible for carrying out the wishes of your loved one with regards to medical care and treatment. If the loved one is unable to do so himself, or cannot, or chooses not to, okay? And the power of attorney can take effect immediately upon the person signing it, or it can take effect at a time in the future, you know, to be designated, and it's specified in the document, okay? So why don't we open up the form. What I'd like to do is go through the form, and then we can answer any questions along the way. As I was saying earlier, people think that you need to hire an attorney, spend money to do these documents, but you don't. You really don't, okay? These documents I downloaded from the UH Elder Law Program. It's a website, and it's free for the public, and they have two forms. This is the short form. It's an easy version. You don't have to type it. You can just fill in the blanks, you know, and as long as it's legible, then it's legal, okay? They also have a longer form if you want to have more detail, which you could also download. If you didn't like the UH website, there are lots of other websites that have comparable forms, you know. Main thing is you come away from this knowing that you don't have to hire an attorney to do that. You can do it yourself, okay? And today, when you guys leave, if you want, I have a lot of extra forms. If you'd like to take a few extra copies with you, please feel free to do so, okay? So let's start with, open up the form, and on the back, the first page, you'll see it says checklist, okay? And this checklist is what's going to help you as you go through it and you prepare this form. It basically takes you step by step on what you want to do. You know, you want to talk with family members and to tell them about what your wishes are. You know, those kinds of things. You want to find someone you trust. You complete the form, and it just tells you what you have to do to make it legal. Okay, so let's leave the list for now. We'll come back to it in a bit. The next page, this tells you under Hawaii law what laws govern preparing a healthcare power of attorney and preparing a living will. It talks about what the powers that the person has, okay? Now, let's go to this page here where it says Advanced Healthcare Directive. So again, like I said, you can download the form and you can just write it. So you write your person's name, and then you would write the name of the individual that's going to be the healthcare agent, you know, the address, the relationship, And then the first section, it talks about when is that agent's authority going to become effective. If you check the box here, then the agent's authority is effective immediately. Okay? And it's always, and you can always revoke it. So you don't have to worry if your patient changes his mind, he wants to appoint someone else, this can easily be revoked. It's not a problem. The next paragraph, it says, I intend my agent's authority to be as broad as possible, subject only to any instructions and limitations I may state in Part 2. And that's important because you want the authority, the powers to be broad because there's a wide range of situations that could develop because of the medical condition. And as long as your patient has talked to the healthcare agent and the healthcare agent knows how the patient feels about, treatment and whatnot, if a situation develops where the patient is unable to speak, the healthcare agent is the one who would then step in and say, okay, no, he wanted it to be this way. He does not want to have artificial hydration and nutrition. He does not want to be, he wants pain medication or he does not want pain medication. If the patient is unable to speak, then it's the healthcare agent's job to do that for him or her. Okay? Part 2, down here at the bottom of the page, individual instructions for healthcare. Okay? So this is where the person will lay out exactly how they feel. For example, when a person is very close to death and, there are times where food and sustenance is not absolutely necessary. And so the person can choose, do they want to have artificial, nutrition, hydration? Yes or no, and they would spell that out. Or they'll say, they'll say, okay, look, if I'm in an unconscious state, I'm in a coma, it's irreversible, I have brain damage, it's irreversible, I don't want to live. For me personally, that's how I feel. So I would check that box, Whereas your person might feel that they want to prolong life. So if they choose the second box, then they want their life to be prolonged, then that means that, the doctors are going to do what they can to prolong the life, Section B, that's where we talk about the artificial nutrition and hydration that I just mentioned. So they check whether they want. The most important one